Now, this should be a very interesting program about the newest building in Bedford to be on the National Register of Historic Places. So I'm going to turn this over to Janet Caldwell and Sister Dorothy Ann Blatnick.
District. This is the 7th. I don't think any other community in Bedford, and maybe the country, has so many National Register buildings or districts as Bedford, Ohio. This one is worthy, and we're real proud to have it. The project started that you're going to see this evening was when we heard the city held a meeting, some of you might have been there, about an interested party interested in changing it a bit, purchasing the property, or at least a portion of it, and turning it into a housing for seniors and lower income. And that has come around. They applied to the National Register to get that on. When they did that, they get a tax break, but the facades of the building had to be returned. That was easy to do on that because things were looking good. They did make a change, and you'll see one I'll show you, where they were asked to change the windows back from vinyl. They can use the latest material, but the facade has to look like it was when the architect designed it. So that is how that works. For almost 100 years, over 90 years, Villa San Bernardo was the home of the Vincentian sisters. And if you are sitting here and we're a Lumen Cordium student, I see some hands going up, then you have walked the property. For the rest of us, we wouldn't think of trespassing on the property. So we didn't see it. This is a treasure that we have. And so you'll see some of the pictures that we have. We can't do this alone. If it wasn't for Sister Dorothy Ann, who was the contact person, and her knowledge about the Vincentian sisters, and Sister will be speaking, she's part 2. Then we couldn't have pulled it off. I wanted to photo document it because to me, that's important to get it before it changed. And then, so that's why we have it. And I asked Terry Blair, I lost him. Terry Blair was a good photographer and volunteered at the museum. And I said, Terry, would you walk with the sister and I and help record it? And he took several hours of photos as we walked around the grounds. Helen Pratt, who is not here this evening, but I'm hoping Helen is watching from home. I asked Helen, she's our resident genealogist, I said, can you do some research for me on the earlier history? And she's a whiz. She came through with information. Cleveland Public Library, a reference librarian, gave us a hand down there. Paul, where's Paul Fleeman? Paul, I go in the museum one day, I said, so we still have the old Cleveland directories. We have all the Bedford phone directories, but we do have some of the Cleveland ones. So he got one out so that we could check an address. And so it takes a few people, as you can see, to pull this program off. And so we're talking about Lot 57. And we can start, Frank's better at this than me. This is just a quick one. Ignore all the numbers. We were labeling where some of the statuary was. But that's Broadway. There's Pinecrest coming across, Union Street. This is what we're talking about today. And that's the new Broadway. You see Gilbert Drive? That's the old Broadway.
This is washed out.
That one is.
No.
It's just that one. So in 1874, there's the township map. And the next slide, there's the one we're talking about. And you can see that the main property owner is not, it doesn't work. It's a sister's thing. Let me use your thing. Okay. It's under Anna. Paul Schneider was her husband, and we'll get through that. Okay, that's 1874. 1914, still Schneider property. These are some of the owners from way back. And you get to some of the names you'll know. There's one of the Flicks. We're concentrating right here. But look, here's a Lamson and his wife were early owners. And there's bits and pieces. In fact, I'm going to show you, I think the next one it is.
Oh my gosh.
This is not the Schneider property. This is their neighbor. All right, you ready for this? That's the Handysides. That's James Handyside, his 4 sons. Doug Handyside married the girl up the hill, Edna Gates, and lived next door, the Gates Handyside house. James Jr. lived over on Wandle Avenue by Eugene, that house that faces, died at 105. That family, this was a summer home. The Schneiders considered their mansion a summer home. Early documents, Bedford was a resort, healthy air. A 1910 document makes that assumption. And what was going on down in Cleveland? Steel mills, a lot of smog, a lot of smoke, pollution, and this was billed as the healthy place to be. So, I'm ready. There's a mansion that Schneider built. And it was used even by the Vincentian sisters. All right. Sister has better pictures than me on some of these. And she's going to correct me if I say something wrong. She'll set you straight. This is the family and friends living sitting on the steps posing for the photographer. Schneider made his money as Schneider and Trenkamp. That was his company. Their primary residence was 159th, 150th Street. They were East Siders, and that's where they lived. Eventually, they moved, I think, permanently here, and they are buried here. Okay, I'm ready for the next one. There's some pictures of Schneider. Had a bowling alley in the basement, and German. Their family emigrated from Germany. So beer was important. The property was so massive that it had a boathouse and at least one lake, two. And an old map, one is marked RES, which to me is short for reservoir. Geologically, the Euclid bluestone comes down and Berea shale comes over. And that confluence of 2 rock structures is in Bedford. And so there probably was a spring somewhere involved in that. Springs like to come up through stuff like that. So at any rate, that is a picture of that. Next one. There's what's left of it. It was drained, but on Facebook, one of the Lumen kids mentions ice skating. So even in the 1960s, there was water there and the girls would ice skate. That's another view of it. All right. Now, at one point, that large mansion was torn down, but parts of it still remain. This section in here was part of the mansion, and it was incorporated into the doors on one of the later buildings. Next one, too. There's some of the detail of it, and another one is coming up. And the chandelier was taken over, and you'll see some pictures also of the outside, some of the statuary. All right. This is Schneider's tombstone. You can see it in Bedford Cemetery, Section 3, which if you go into the main entrance under the arch, Section 3 will be on your left side above Section 1, which is the first section. To me, it's one of my favorites, which is why I put it in. You know, it's the stonemason leaving the work undone. And the whole family is there. Even as late as 1965, Gretchen was buried. I don't know where they went to school. if they went to Bedford schools or not. We could certainly find that out. One that's a mystery to me, here's Paul, 1910 he died, and Anna died in 1912, but there's a Mrs. Schneider who died in 1900. It tells us that he purchased this burial plot before, and that probably was his mother, because when we see things like that, it's usually a mother living with a family. Okay, now we're going to move forward. In 1924, on the Twinsburg Road, and I should mention that's Broadway now, but in 1924, that section was called the Twinsburg Road because it went on to Twinsburg. And the property was still listed as the Schneider homestead, even though both Mr. and Mrs. Schneider were dead. The children, about 1915, there's a document, power of attorney to Frederick, that's one of the children. So at that point, I think they were thinking of selling it. We don't know if the children were grown and lived elsewhere, and when their parents died, it just sat derelict and empty. But a real estate developer named Bernard Schatzinger purchased the property. We have no evidence that Bernard Schatzinger lived in it, but he bought it. He was a developer, and he bought that property. I'm showing these are from before World War I. He had several business partners, several things. The neighborhood, the Lee Harvard neighborhood, has Schatzinger homes. He lived in Lakewood, and his married son lived in Lakewood. So, and that's, seems far. We have an East Sider vacationing here and a real estate developer from Lakewood. It's not the only property he owned in Bedford. In fact, I should say that Schneider, that wasn't the only property. Schneider owned the other side of Union a section, and you know where the McMiler Interstate property, on the early maps, that's marked Paul Schneider. So he was a large landowner at that time. Schatzinger owned other property in Bedford, and he owned other property throughout Northeast Ohio. Okay, I caught this from a Facebook page from a student from it, and she writes it better than I can tell you. The reason they called the property St. Bernard is because Schatzinger, who died at the age of 63, his widow Sabrina, who then inherits his estates, his property throughout the Ohio, she donated the property to the Roman Cleveland Diocese, Bishop Strings. And so he in turn turned it over to the Vincentian sisters, and Sister will tell you the human side of all of that. So that is it. Now let me move forward a bit more. When the Vincentian sisters, I'm the property person, they purchased it, they lived on it, and built this shrine. And this is one that Helen found. It's an early picture of the original shrine. That's Lady, I'll say it wrong, Levicha. Our Lady of Levicha. And that was a shrine that people came to Bedford by the busload to see. Now there's another picture. Here's the shrine as it is today. These were removed now, the side ones. Several thousand could come, and every July people would come. I think that's my next thing. No, I have something. The plain dealer spells it one way, other people spell it, but you get the general gist of that. That's the one in the middle, Sister says, is probably the correct one. Am I right on that? Okay. These are plain dealer articles, just the tops of them. 7,000 Slovaks come to the shrine in Bedford. They came from Pittsburgh, Detroit. They came from all over to pay homage, have a pilgrimage, as it's called, to the shrine. And there would be masses every hour. And this went on for years and years and years. Okay, next one, please. That's the mother house that was built. The order really grew from 3 or 5 starters to a lot. And so they needed more space. This is the building that was built in 1931. This one cost $150,000 to build. I couldn't find the builder's name. It is a style that's commonly used throughout Cleveland, I believe, for Catholic churches. It's called Lombardic architecture. And Lombards, if you look that up, that type of architecture is interesting. They were actually like the Vikings that wreaked havoc all through Europe and came south, and a group of them came into southern Italy, and they liked that type of architecture. Narrower windows with arches, clay tile that you would see in Italy, but certainly not anything like Western Roman architecture at all. Just popular. That's the cornerstone. We got a picture of that, and you can see it's also in Slovakian. All right, friend. These are some of the details of the pretty building. That building's still there. So this is it. All right, now I'm going to stop on this one. This was the bishop's entrance, because when he would come out to celebrate Mass or that, he had his own quarters separate from the rest of the people that lived there. But those of you of a certain age, you see the civil defense? Okay, we'll move on. It's still there?
But no, it was civil defense for everybody in the area, not just the sisters.
All right. If you didn't hear that in the back, Sister says that civil defense served the whole area up there, not just the people on the grounds. And that was supplying food, water for so many days. I'm going to show you some outside pictures, and then my part of this is done. But the property was and is gorgeous. These are some of the pictures. That's from looking out from this 1979 building. Okay.
Which is?
Separate. I'll show you in the next picture. There's the building, another one that was built then. And that had the carillon. That's still there. And now the new owners, and Sister will tell you about the new owners in the future. All right, here is the interior of that. Terry took pictures. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful place. And that's John Lippi. John Lippi. I don't know if the name's familiar, but he was a Cleveland architect. This was called California style architecture. But Lippi also built, remember Bedford City Hall on Columbus Road? He was the architect for that. Blumencordium High School. There's some over in Parma. Very recognizable type of architecture built in the 1950s and 60s. All right, I'll stop here because this is a detail that's in the sanctuary at the time. And that is when you enter the Catholic Church, that's where the holy water is. Those of you of that faith are familiar. If you're Protestant, we don't have holy water at the entrance. So that was designed by Norbert Cohn. Now Norbert Cohn is still alive. Norbert and Victoria are artists. They were German, immigrated here, and if you ever go up South Euclid on Green Road, and I recommend it, wear a good shoe, it's called the Sanctuary Garden. Norbert's artwork and sculpture works are throughout the property, and they have a lovely gift shop. They used to have a tea room, but I think with COVID, that's not there now. But it's on Green Road, South Euclid, and they live in an older building I thought was interesting. It overlooks 9 Mile Creek, and if you read a paper frequently, you'll see Dr. Roy Larrick's comments on saving and opening up 9 Mile Creek is now a nice conservation area out there. It's a wetland. They live in a 1910 house, a 140-year-old barn, which he uses for sculptural work. And originally, the Cohns it was a Jerusalem artichoke farm before they bought it. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, you get into research and then you find all these tidbits and things. So these are more interior pictures. Okay. This is on the door, right? I got that right. And that is the symbol for this, Vincentian sisters. And I think, the next one is
It's the coat of arms.
coat of arms for that. Okay. Here's a few of the outbuildings. This is the one you see on Broadway on the right. Just before you go up Snyder Hill, which is that hill, that is it. Now, that was taken before it was National Register property. See the old vinyl windows? When you go by next time, take a look. They've been replaced and it's nice. I'm not sure what they're using it for. I think sisters, it's apartments.
Apartments.
All right, there's apartments in there now. It was originally going to be used for the high school. That didn't work out. That's why they built Lumen-Cordium. This is familiar to a lot of us because we've had a lot of parties in that building. You know, I always thought that was maybe it's the original church. Sister says, no, it wasn't. When you have 7,000 people visiting you in July, they want fed. So that was built to keep people out of the weather and to feed them when they came for their pilgrimages. And these are two other buildings down in the lower level. That lower level probably originally was the lake bottom because the water's still there as that pond. And when it was drained and this opened up. Okay. All righty. Now, okay, keep going. These are just shots. It's the old descending steps. That's original. That's one of the pieces from Schneider. And the next one is too. These are over 100 years old from that. This is the start of some newer things. The Slovakian Women's Auxiliary, I suppose it would be called,
Women's Guild.
collected money to build this shrine. Next picture will show us more detail. It's a memorial of love to the boys and girls in service during the Second World War that served, the Slovakian Americans that served in the war, and they made this beautiful, beautiful shrine. And that's still there.
Yes.
This isn't, but this was.
Just the
was it?
brickwork, because
All right.
statues are gone.
Okay, statues are gone. After the Vincentians sold the property, some of the statuary that you will see has now been moved. One's in Broadview Heights at a church. Some went down to the Mother House, but Sister can get into that. But that's St. Vincent whom they served because he was a servant to help people, and that was the saints on either side helped him in his mission or dedicated their lives. Same with these. Look at the beautiful, I mean, it's just breathtaking, this artwork. Okay, next one's St. John. The worst one is the one that's named after. This is St. Bernard. You have a better picture than I do, I think.
I think I do.
I think so too, yeah. Okay, so off we go to the next picture. This is, actually the girls I think from the school put this in. It was the peace pole, it was called. It's in different languages all the way around. It was moved during construction, it hasn't been put back up. At some point it'll be put back up. Okay. These are just some of the property that we would have no thing. And that's my last one on this. I'm going to move my bear story up to this one. I have a bear story for you. Okay. In fact, Frank and Sister can set theirs up. But this is down in the woods, the bottom, which used to be like Stations of the Cross and stuff. But I did an oral history of a Bedford person, and one of the stories he told me was he grew up there in the McMyler neighborhood. All the homes that were up in that neighborhood were built because of McMyler Industries. And the kids told him that the gypsies, who usually stayed at Durback's Villa, if you were long remember Durback's Villa, it's Benvenue's parking lot now. But he would let the gypsies who come in August to this day, they they would camp up there. But the kids told them, and this is back in the 30s, that the sisters had allowed them to set up camp next to the lake, the pond, or lake, whatever you want to call that, and that they had a bear. So my interviewee says, as a child, he wanted to see the bear. And so he snuck down off Union Street, in through the woods, down the hillside, so that nobody would see him. And sure enough, the gypsies were encamped by the water, and tied outside was a black bear, a real live bear. He says it made my day. Okay, so that's the end of my sisters up now, and Frank is dropping in
Thank you. I just have to,
Well, he's coming back.
he's coming back. Okay, I can say a couple of things real quick here.
Okay, you stand over there and I'll see if I can get us back on.
Okay. So, thank you all for coming, and I'm going to really try to watch my time here. Just a couple things, not an excuse, but hopefully to make sense. I will overlap a little bit of what Janet has said. There's only so many slides that we could access, first of all, but I may take it a little different dimension. Okay, so you'll see some of the pictures again. She asked me if I would speak about the sisters and what occurred there. So as Janet said, the property, 23 acres, was sold by the Sisters of Charity to the Testa companies. Now let me step back for a minute. All 23 acres constitutes the historic district. Included in that district is Light of Hearts Villa, which was Lumen Cordium High School, the Party Center, which you saw. It was kind of just called the Party Center. That is now Redemption Center Church, but that is on part of the property. Villa San Bernardo, which is where the Sisters' Mother House, headquarters in other words, is located. And then 8.5 acres remaining from those divisions is now called Ascension Pathways, and I'll speak to that at the end. It's a nonprofit, it's newly established, and I'll tell you a bit about it. So what was all just Sisters' property is now all these separate entities, but they're all part of the historic district. If you think of Little Italy, that's a district, but you have all kind of entities in it, and that's what this is, okay? And that's the rationale for all those different names. So, let me see here. So let me go back. This is a picture that we had access to of the Schatzinger summer home as it appeared in 1905, but it was still called Della Paul Schneider. Right, but that building was what eventually given to us as our mother house. If I'm using Catholic words that don't make any sense to you, just raise your hand and I'll clarify. I mean, I say them and then I forget, people may not know. A mother house is the headquarters of the whole community, but the sisters may be living in many other places. So right now, getting ahead of myself, but in 2004, the Vincentian Sisters of Charity of Bedford closed down their congregation and became part of the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. Mount St. Joseph, if you've ever heard of that, university is there, belongs to the community. So our community was dissolved, okay, on purpose, okay? Nobody did it to us, it was our choice. And I'll tell you again a little bit later. So, again, that building became our first mother house. Okay.
Next.
Yeah. What I'm going to do is show you all the generations of the mother house buildings. You've seen them in bits and pieces, but I'm just going to use that to kind of tell the story. Okay, so that's, I'm guessing somewhere around 1930. There was no year on it, but what you see there is the mansion. And it had already been adjusted somewhat. The porches were added, but judging by what the sisters were wearing, I'm guessing it's still around the 30s and 40s. Okay? The next building is what Janet showed you. And that was built in 1931. And the back of it, over here and around, is where that other building connects to it. And you're welcome to drive through the property. Nobody's going to yell at you. Just, you can still see it there. Okay. This next building is from the 1960s. And again, you still have that same mother house mansion with the 31 building with this addition on it now. And that was built in the early 60s. And I entered the community in 1964, and it went up somewhere around then. And we used it for more housing space because we had more members coming in. This building, you see something's gone, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The mansion went down, and the part that I just showed you also went down. The additions to that went down. This was built in 1979 and is attached to the 1931 building to this day. Okay? The reason we had to take it down, we found out the insurance company wasn't going to insure it anymore because the wires were frayed and ready to burn in the walls. And so it was either renovate at an exorbitant cost or just take it down and put up something new. So we chose the latter. And that's where you get the current looking building. And I put this in here because that's what it looks like right now. All right? So that 79 building is still there, 31 is still there, and this is the addition that was put up by the tester companies who bought, minus Light Hearts Villa, bought the acreage from the Sisters of Charity. So at this point, the Sisters of Charity are not connected to the property in any way, shape, or form. Okay? Just to be clear, because again, that can be very confusing. All right, we sold the entire property. Okay, so let me, you can just leave that there for a second. Okay, let me just go back. I think the way some of this got started is interesting, so if you'll just bear with me. I won't read a ton of it, but the Vincentian sisters came to Bedford in 1928. 5 sisters came from Pittsburgh, Vincentian Sisters of Charity. Their mother house was in Pittsburgh. Bishop Joseph Drems was the Bishop of Cleveland. And if you think about 1920s and the first decades before that, thousands of immigrants from Eastern Europe were pouring into the United States. And bishops, especially in the northern states, had immigrants they didn't know what to do with and couldn't talk to. And that was the case. And so they were looking for priests and sisters who could staff parishes and schools and speak to the hundreds of these people pouring into their cities. And that's exactly what the bishop's problem was. The sisters in Pittsburgh, and I'll spare you details, came from Romania, and they spoke Slovak and some of that Middle Eastern language base. So he asked, would they send some sisters to Cleveland? But his intention from the beginning was clear. He wanted to start a congregation that would be located and become part of the Cleveland diocese. It wouldn't be run by the sisters in Pittsburgh. Okay? So, 5 sisters came, and he brought them because of the Slovak immigrants that were already residing in the Cleveland area, and there were already parishes that were started. The sisters from Pittsburgh continued to nurture this little group until about 1939, and then they left and returned back to Pittsburgh, those that were from Pittsburgh. A couple remained and became part of the Bedford sisters. okay? In fact, our first Mother Superior was one of those. In 1948, the Cleveland Diocese was separated from Youngstown, or Youngstown was separated from the Cleveland Diocese. We had sisters in Youngstown, and we decided to stay there, to leave them in the Youngstown Diocese. By 1965, the community had numbered about 150 sisters. That was our peak number of members, which as religious orders go, is very small, even then. Okay, that's a small number. All right, let me just shuffle my papers here. And I'm not going to do this for the next 60 years of the community's life, but this first part I think is kind of precious. So, in 1928, the bishop asks for sisters to come from Pittsburgh, which they do. And on September 10th, 1928, there was a public ceremony, and Bishop Schrems came and blessed the property and gave it its name, Villa San Bernardo, for the reason that Janet explained, in honor of Bernard Schatzinger, whose family donated the property to the diocese, because the bishop was asking outright if people had property they could donate to the diocese, because he had to house these sisters and priests who were coming from Europe somewhere. So the Schatzingers donated the property to the Cleveland Diocese. The bishop, in turn, turned it around and gave it to the Vincentian sisters. He did not own the property, never did, and never will at this point in time. Okay? All right. That we know of. All right. In the fall of 1928, get this straight here, 3 young women came with one of the priests to the property for the blessing of the property. Okay. And Sister Mary Bonaventure was one of those individuals. And she tells it in her own words. So I'm just going to read what she, in her own words, said about that. She said it was September 8, 1928, when Mary Janice, a graduate of Sacred Heart Academy in Danville, Pennsylvania, and Veronica Arway of St. John the Baptist Church in Akron, Ohio, were brought by Father George Novak to Bedford, Ohio for the blessing of the convent grounds. 9 a.m. found us in Bedford. Slovak priests numbering 30 or 40 were assembled for the Holy Mass and ground blessing of Villa San Bernardo. 4 Vincentian Sisters of Charity from Perrysville, Pennsylvania, which is right by Pittsburgh, were present and assigned to teach at St. Mary's School. Sister Mary Dorothy, principal, Sister Egidia, Dolores, Ephraim, and Christina was kind of like their housekeeper. She was one of the sisters. These 4 sisters arrived the previous Saturday to teach at St. Mary's and reside at the Schatzinger estate, which at that time was neglected. So we heard about this mansion. You picked your mansion. It was in a kind of a sorry state when it was handed over. Just a fact, okay? And she saw it herself and testified to that. The sisters were told us, I'm trying to talk too fast, forgive me. Sisters told us they sat on orange crates. That's all. There was nothing in the building. Nothing. So they had orange crates to sit on, to use for table space, and the parishioners from St. Mary's brought them food and helped them get furniture and beds and everything they needed to set up house. So the Jobic family, I know by name, was one of them, but there were others. So thanks to those generous people that got those women up and on their feet. Those 4 sisters, this is Bonaventure talking, those 4 sisters arrived the previous Saturday to teach at St. Mary's and reside at the Schatzinger estate, which was neglected. Father John Hagel and Mother Emma Ranciano, who was the head sister in Pittsburgh, were also there. It was 11 or 11:30 a.m. The Holy Mass and blessing services were over. The bishops, priests, and Schatzingers went for a dinner. After the dinner, the bishops and priests had a meeting which lasted until 5 p.m. "Who are these young ladies?" asked Bishop Strauss. "What do they want?" "They're my girls," answered Father Novak. "I brought them along. They want to be nuns." It's so simple. Just "Call them here," said the bishop. After conversation, the bishop suggested they enter in September to serve the Slovak people of the Diocese of Cleveland. Later, he would give them their names and religion. Mary would be Sister Mary Bonaventure. Bonaventure means a good beginning, the bringer of good things. Veronica would be Sister Mary Bernardo, in honor of, guess who? Mr. Schatzinger. And Mary Slavic from St. Cyril and Methodius in Lakewood joined them in October and was given the name of Sister Mary Joseph in honor of St. Joseph, the bishop's patron, Joseph Strauss. Okay? End of story. But that was, in her own words, her eyewitness account of that day's events. Okay. Let's see. You want to go from there? Okay, I have some statues here which Janet showed you. So that's a better picture of St. Bernard.
Yeah.
Shall I tell him the story?
Yeah, tell them the story.
Do not repeat this in public. You're sworn. You're sworn to secrecy. About 30 years ago, 20, maybe it was 25. Some young men who were never founders, I'm assuming it's men, it may not have been. But anyway, because Broadway runs behind these trees. This is right when you come into the property by the party center. It's hard to see them because often the trees shade that statue. But they came along and lopped off St. Bernard's head. Smooth cut, right off. Well, nothing else was damaged. The statue was perfect. So Sister Helen, who was Immaculata, some of you may know her by that name, said, "What are you going to do?" So she went down to Mazzolini, who was a sculptor in the Cleveland, did a lot of work for Cleveland parishes for statuary. So she went to see him and she said, "Here's what happened. Do you think you could put a head on the statue?" And he said, "Well, I don't have Bernard, but I do have," and I don't have a picture, "a young Abraham Lincoln." True. So, got Abraham, and his head fit perfectly. And to this day is there. That statue will remains as a historic part. Some of us very disrespectfully called the statue now St. Abernard. We are sure both of those are in heaven, and neither one would mind sharing the statue. So, the statues, there were a lot of statues, but when our leadership in Cincinnati, when we decided we had to put the property up for sale, we didn't need it. It was too much and very costly, as you can imagine. So they came out and they took anything they thought they could use in Cincinnati. So a number of the statues were taken, removed, and taken down there. And they're in beautiful settings. Some right there at the Mother House. Others went to a couple schools in the area. But they were well used. We didn't know who was going to buy the property. And we didn't want to leave it open for desecration. So it was a tough decision what stayed, what went, but that was why the statues were removed. There are still 6 there now, And they will stay there, and I've got my notes. Christopher in the pond, in the lake, he's still there. The altar, which Janet talked about, St. Anthony, which I think I may have a shot of that. In the upper tier of the gardens, St. John the Evangelist, the gospel writer, St. Therese of Lisieux, that bigger statue that you saw, and then St. Bernard. So those are still there. And they will remain because they have to stay because it's historic property. Okay? So there's still images of the Catholicity of the property, but it is no longer religious property, and I want to be straightforward about that, okay? It doesn't belong to the sisters, and it's not religious property. Does that make sense? It's just property like any other property. Okay, even though there's a shrine building and some of these statues there. And there are legal church rules about property that's designated religious and all that, so I'm not going to go into that, but there's a lot more. I don't want to make it sound crass. There's a reason why it's not religious property, okay? All right. That's Guardian Angel. This is St. Therese down in what we call the Rose Garden, and it's the garden that I'll show right at the end of it. You'll see what we've done to that garden, at least to that point in time. Okay. More gardens. Quick story, and this is, I guess, a divine providence in some way. Real quick here. You can't see it well. But there is a statue of St. Elizabeth Seton, who, for those of you who might know, was the first American-born Catholic to be canonized a saint. Mother Cabrini was canonized, but she was an immigrant and a naturalized citizen. Elizabeth Seton was born in New York City. Okay? Anyway, Father Danko from St. Mary's, some of you know, and a family had special devotion because at the time, for someone to become a saint, there have to be miracles, people have to pray to them. I won't get into all that, but there was a lot of prayer going on for a family from St. Mary's who was praying for a sick child. The child was healed. I don't know that that miracle was one of them that was accepted, but the child was cured, and to honor Elizabeth, they donated the statue and they put it on our property. That had to be in the late 60s maybe, because that was when she was being canonized. Little did anybody know, Elizabeth Seton is the patron saint of the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati, of whom we are now members. Isn't that ironic? God has his ways, you know? Okay. All right, so moving from there, the Sacred Heart is in our cemetery at the Mother House. There's St. Anthony. It looks like Francis because of the nature setting, but that's really St. Anthony. It's quite overgrown right now. When that picture was taken, the school kids from St. Barnabas and their parents cleaned it all up, put in new shrubbery to honor Sister Alice Marie, who passed away. They loved her dearly, so they wanted to honor her. Anthony's there. John's up in the corner, John the Evangelist, who is hopefully will be restored. A lot of the weeds have been taken away. He was kind of covered up. Okay.
He's still there?
He is still there, yes. Okay. And there's a picture of Christopher, and that was before any construction started or whatever. And it still looks a little like that. You'll see another slide at the end. It's different for, well, yeah, this is good. Okay. Let me just get rid of these papers here. Too many papers. Okay. Just a word about the shrines. I put them together here. Janet showed you, Janet showed you the one up there. That was the very first shrine. Now, mind you, we didn't officially become a community till 1939. We had members coming, but we didn't become officially till 39. That statue was brought to Bedford from Europe by the mothers and other women from St. Wendelin Parish, one of whom had a daughter in our community. The statue, which is here, and it was visible there, and it's visible in the other shrines as well, was carved from an apple tree in Europe and touched to the statue of Our Lady of Levica in Slovakia, and then brought to the United States to be put in our shrine. As far as we know, there's no other statue of her in the U.S. At least that's what we understand. There was, the Virgin Mary was in a chapel in Slovakia on a mountain called Mount Levica, and there's a town by that name, so that's why it's named that. But the Slovak women wanted to bring, as all immigrants do, part of their own culture, especially religious culture and meaning, wanted to bring it to the United States. And so that's how the statue came. However, that original shrine faced Broadway, and I think what happened when they started to expand Broadway, it limited the amount of space for people to get in front of the shrine. So a new one was built, because this is still the old one, and you see the numbers of people there, and they would be backed right up to Broadway here. So in 1951, the new shrine was built, and you see it still has just park benches there. And then additionally, better seating was added, colonnades were put up because the blazing sun is in the summer there all day long. And also you can take note of how many people were coming to the shrine for devotions to Mary. They come for a whole day. They come from Youngstown and Lorraine and Akron and Janet mentioned even other places. And they would spend the day and then go home. Buses would bring them. Okay? And that's not unique to this. Shrines, if you've heard of Lourdes and some of the other famous shrines, that same sort of thing happens. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and so Janet had a better shot. I have the winner shot of the shrine as it was currently, is it now? But if you look up here, see the deterioration? Okay, so as time went on, from the 70s and on, those devotional practices dropped off. As with many immigrant communities of various ethnic backgrounds, the first generation wants to keep the culture. The second generation, maybe. Third generation, they're enculturated and it doesn't have the same sense. Not in every family, but that tends to be a pattern. And that's what happened. So by the late 60s, and simultaneous to that, we had the Second Vatican Council in the Catholic Church, which made a lot of changes in the church, and devotions were, how do I want to say this correctly? Still appropriate, but not the centerpiece of the Catholic faith. The Mass is the centerpiece of Catholic worship and spirituality. And so as that was taking effect, then some of the other devotional practices became less and less. And so by the 70s, 80s, certainly, groups would come, they were much smaller, and there was less, use of that shrine area. Okay. And I put this in as a segue into just some further comments here. Are you getting tired? I don't see anybody sleeping yet. When that happens, I definitely stop. I put this in. This is the chapel that is in the 1979 wing with the bell tower on it. It's what it looked like when that was changed even subsequent to this a little bit. But you notice the change, and again, that's part of Vatican II. Focuses around the altar, not 50 yards back where you can't even see what's going on up in front. And I'm not making fun, I'm just saying the architecture follows the meaning, correct? Okay, so as churches were built after the 60s, many were built in a semicircle or circular pattern. And that's the reason for it, and that's what was true of our chapel. I'm pointing this out because if any of you from Lumen Cordium or who have been in Lumen Cordium recognize the gym ceiling. Do you? Because Mr. Lippi built Lumen, and when he built the mother house, he said, well, he built Lumen with the rounded windows, circular patterns. He said, it's a girls' school, it shouldn't be a box. So he designed it with curves and, right? Softened the appearance of it. And so when he built this later for us, he tried to match the pattern a bit. And he did a very nice job. Notice the curved windows and the ceiling. Okay, so that was Mr. Lippi's wonderful contribution. So moving the story forward, I used that chapel as a segue because the sisters are not about the property, they're not about the statues, they were about serving God and people, okay, which necessitates spirituality. All right, so the chapel was the focal point of our life, and that's why I put what the current chapel looked like. It's still there, but the statues are gone, and the windows are there, the ceiling, so you can still tell, what it was. I put this in because everything flows from the life that happens in the chapel. The people came to the shrine, but we use the shrine also. This was a first profession of 4 of the sisters. Okay? And so we had canopy up because, again, it was in August and it was just sweltering out there. Okay. Here's another picture of a pilgrimage. Those of you who know the property that know on the far side of the property, not right up to Union Street, but on that side of the property, it's hilly, and there are 14 hutches that have the Stations of the Cross. The statues are in safekeeping right now because we didn't want them damaged by people or weather. But that was part of the pilgrimage, was to make those stations. They're on 2 levels. Covers an extensive walkway. So you can see the number of people, and I'm guessing that was maybe in the 40s, just looking at the clothing and so forth. Okay, and this is another pilgrimage picture. So they're coming from the shrine, around here, down the drive, way up, and around the lake, and back up again as part of their devotions. So just to give you an idea. And the sisters, we would join them. Not every single time, but you can see the sisters here, novices who have not made vows wore white veils, and then those who were just aspiring to enter the community, we call them postulants. They're up in the front there. But they came from parishes, like I said, from all over, and these would be like sodalities and groups of people from those parishes who would be part of that. Okay. And the other part of the sisters' lives was their ministry. And we have tons of pictures, but this was in our anniversary book, and so I just took this to give you some idea. Our primary ministry up until about 1949 was to Slovak parishes and schools, primarily schools. After that, you know what happened in the early 50s? People moved out of the downtown areas, out to where? The suburbs. One of them being Bedford, okay? And others, and that still goes on. I mean, it's still multiplying further out. But that is what happened. And besides the move to the suburbs, you had baby boom. And all these kids had to go to school. And there weren't enough people to teach them. Okay, so a lot was going on at that time, and that's how we got into a number of other schools. The Slovak schools we taught in early on, up till the late 40s. Well, St. Mary's wasn't Slovak, it was a territorial parish. It wasn't a nationality parish, but we did teach at St. Mary's. Our Lady of Mercy Cleveland, Holy Trinity Lorraine, Cyril and Methodius Warren, St. Andrews Cleveland, Cyril and Methodius in Barberton, Elizabeth's in Youngstown, Holy Trinity in Struthers, and St. John the Baptist in Akron were schools that we staffed up through the 40s. And they were Slovak parishes. So in the late 1960s or 1967, well, it started in earlier than that. That was the first graduating class. But Lumen Cordia was started in 1962-63 at the far end of the property. And then it was closed due to declining enrollment. Demographics changed, population changed, and so we had to close the school. And in 87 was the last graduating class, I think. And it was reopened in 89 as Light of Hearts Villa, which is assisted living. They have a memory care unit and also respite care. It is not a nursing home. It is assisted living. Okay, some other ministries, just briefly here. We had sisters who went down to Bell County in Kentucky to St. Anthony's Parish, which was very tiny, and became part of an interfaith group to minister there because it was the poorest county in Kentucky. And they were trying to do some teaching and some work for the parish. They would go up into the hollers and register people who hadn't been to church for a while and so forth and so on. Sister Ruth Ann was part of that. Ruth Ann Rhodey, some of you may know her. She was part of that. We also had Joseph's ministry. Ruth Ann was part of that too. It was what we call hospice today, but ministry to the dying. This was early on, right, a little bit ahead of when some of the hospice facilities took over. Okay. So this, I think, there's again no date on it, but I'm guessing we didn't take pictures a lot. In fact, we weren't supposed to have a picture taken early on. But because of what it looks like, I'm guessing this might be 1939 when this community officially became established as a diocesan community. Otherwise, I don't know why they're standing there like that. Anyway, these are all the Professed sisters. And then you have novices. And then you have more postulants. And here's Vincent de Paul out in the middle of what is now, or has been, the parking lot. But was in that threesome that Janet showed you. He was originally in that area, and so that statuary that she showed you would be back here. So I'm guessing around 1939 there were 44 women who made final or perpetual vows that day. There were still 22 others who were not under final vows, because you take first vows for like 3 years before you make it permanent, and women who had just come to look at the community as well. So told there were close to 60 people, 60 sisters maybe that day.
That's what it looks like.
Okay, flip to the next one. Now, that was when it was officially started, And this is the year before we officially ended. We had 50 members. I think there's 55, 57, because there are seven sisters missing from the photo. But Bishop Pilla came for our 75th anniversary in 2003. So again, full circle almost in terms of membership. Okay. And yeah, and now could you flip on that same thing, go to VP presentation. All right, I'm gonna, do we still have okay time?
Yeah.
Yes? Betsy, are we okay? Okay.
Not a VP presentation.
VP. Yeah. And do the large icons. Okay, there you go. All right, I'm going to go through I'm not going to narrate this one. I'm just brief comments. I'm going to show you pictures of the 8.5 acres that is the most recent entity to arrive on the property. You know Lumen, Light of Hearts, you know the Party Center, which is now Redemption Center Church. And my understanding is they are going to buy that property, so they will be an independent entity on the property, but they'll be part of the historic district, okay? Villa San Bernardo is the name of the property where the mother house buildings were, and which now houses those 59 apartments that were put in place by the Testa companies from Cuyahoga Falls, okay? Behind the mother house area there, the building area where the apartments are 8.5 acres of gorgeous natural beauty. Some cultured gardens, but we stopped investing resources into that part of the property around 2010 when we knew we were putting the property up for sale. We just did bare minimum maintenance on it. So Mother Nature did her thing until we took hold of it again just somewhat recently. The Testa companies suggested, it's a nonprofit, it has a board of 3 members and then volunteers. They said, why don't we name the property something that would honor the sisters who developed the property into the lovely gardens that were once there. And so we came up with the name Vincentian Pathways. And the whole mission of that entity is to restore and reclaim and bring it back to life, so to speak, and to make it available not just to the people who live in the apartments, but to the people here in the community as well, the larger community, and not just Bedford. We know there are many senior citizens in this southeast area, Maple Heights, Bedford, Oakwood, Twinsburg, I mean, a lot of senior citizens, and many don't feel safe going to the metro parks to just sit or read or walk by themselves or even with somebody else. This area is lovely. It's secluded. We think it's safe. We've not had a problem with vandalism or any kind of harm coming to anybody. And so we want to restore it, and that's the mission of Vincentian Pathways. So there would be a lovely place where people come for quiet, enjoy nature, sit and talk with a friend, walk the pathways, read a book. The metro parks have places for athletic activity, okay? And so that's what we need to be about. As you can imagine, a lot of money needs to be raised to get that off the ground and going. So what I'm going to show you are some slides. We're going to go through them really fast. Some are ugly. But we took this series of slides several years ago when we were looking for an architect to help us think about how we could design that area. And we put in the stuff that isn't pretty so he could see what's really there, because he did not come out to the property initially. So we're just going to go through, so you'll see some of it. Janet had some very lovely shots, and those are real. Nothing's fake here, folks, okay? It is beautiful, but it's not very pretty. And just a comment, so you see the chain link fence? In 2016, we had a flood. The water came up to the top of the chain link fence, all the way around.
Oh, my.
I came out one day and the ducks were sitting on the top of the fence. You could not see their feet, but they were sitting on the top of the fence. Christopher's head and hand were visible. That's how high the water was. So it was a broken drainage that was really in front of the lower building, that retreat house. It didn't totally collapse, but it broke enough that we had a bad rain and the water just couldn't get through. Because that water is not standing. It comes from Union Street down under the ground, through a spillway way back here, out a spillway here, under the ground, out a pipe that goes down into the Metro Parks, into Tinker's Creek. So that is moving water, okay? All right, so, but because of, and that's okay, because of the flood, you see all these dead trees around? So we lost all the trees that were around the pond. They were in water. It took probably 2 months till it really drained, and the trees died. Okay, you can, more of that, you see the dead trees. Now, they're pretty much gone. This is up on the hillside, okay? There is a pathway, but it probably needs some attention. And I think some of that may have been our maintenance men yet from the sisters, who as trees died and they chopped them, they just put them there. But they're, are they still there? Is that mess still there?
Didn't see that.
I don't think so. Maybe it was removed. It was recently done. So we were trying to take pictures to show the architect where we thought there might be some problems. So you'll see some broken cement blocks, and you'll see some trees that still are holding on. Okay, you can just keep going with those. Okay, this is up on the hillside. The pond is down there. Okay, how those trees are staying there is kind of a miracle. Okay, just keep going. Okay, that's actually the chairman of our board for the pathways. That's Ryan Landon.
What's this there?
That's a steel path that, because this goes down, the stations are up here, so that reinforces the walkway up there. Thank you for asking that. Okay. All right. And that's looking toward the back, and Janet showed you that. That's standing right by the pond looking towards the south. Okay. This was a log cabin built for a purpose that was never ended up being used for. It was storage for a while, then it was kind of a little retreat area. We fixed it up inside. It's very rustic, but it needs attention. And there's stairways here. These are wood steps, but there was some collapse of the wood there, as you can see. So we have to decide how that will be used and how we can repair it. That is, again, looking from the south end of the property towards the lake. There's Christopher, there's the fence, and then this goes up to where the mother house buildings were and where the apartments are now. I show you this because the property is tiered on the side that's closest to Broadway. And so you get a tier here and then some steps and then it goes up again. I mean, it's gorgeous if you have the vision to see what isn't there yet. Okay, there's some more of this here, but you can see how the cracks, and we can't just take them up and put in cement or concrete. It has to be restored as it was, which is slate. They're expensive, so we have to use what's there, and I'll show you another side where it was done. But you can see how it has weathered. Okay, that's going up toward what was the party center. Okay, go ahead. Oh, and these are steps, go back just one if you would, Jack. These are steps that go from the ground level up, but I think those are cleared, the kids cleared it. We had 60 students from Bedford High School in
Fall.
the fall,
Yeah.
came out for service day. We did like crazy. So a lot of this has been brought back to at least a nice appearance because the weeds have been taken out, okay? But there are steps, but the steps are in need of great repair. Some more you can see, okay, how Mother Nature does what she does. Okay? Okay, that wall, I'll show you at the end how that has been fixed up, okay? That's up on the driveway is up there, going down toward the apartments, and this is the tier right under it. Some more of that, you can see. It wasn't badly damaged. We did some we had to do some patching, and then it was painted, and it's in good shape. Okay, the tree is gone. This is what we called St. Teresa's Garden because of the statue. But this is the very first one you see when you come down from the driveway, right next to the apartments. This is the one you walk into first. Okay, there's St. Anthony, overgrown. Okay, the one the kids fixed up, that's the spot. There's a pathway here that needs to be. And look who's watching. The owner of the property. Or so they think.
Yeah.
Okay, and we were just looking around there. Okay, yeah, keep going. There's some more of the sidewalks up to the upper tier. More of that.
You can
Okay,
see what
there's-
the beauty was there.
You can see it. You can see what was there, yeah. Okay. Now, this, we worked mightily on this. This is St. Teresa's Garden. Notice that wall. You may not notice it as much, but it's been painted. It's a beautiful beige. Here's the slate sidewalks that were broken. You can see they were cracked. In August, 2 men were out there lifting the slate sidewalks, moving the side, putting in, I can't think of the name of it, it looks like sand, but when it gets wet, you can put it where you want it, and then it hardens like concrete. I can't think of what it's called. They're using it in all kinds of stuff now. Then put the sidewalks back on top, used a laser to straighten them to be perfectly flat from that end to here where the steps start up again. Did it all the way around here in the heat of the day. So it doesn't look like much, but it was a lot of work.
It looks like a lot.
Yeah.
It's like smooth stone.
Yeah, so, and that's another, just showing, we're trying to get the picture of the sidewalk.
That's it.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you for that. That was a lot of listening. We're staying, I know there's, Betsy, I think has refreshments. If you have questions, come. I just want to introduce here, Margie Henning is one of the board members now. And Margie is free to tell you, those of you who might be interested, the architect's drawing of what we're envisioning for pathways. And we have some cards, and we have name cards if you want to contact us. We have a website. It's just Vincentian Pathways, lowercase, all one word, .org. We're also on Facebook under Vincentian Pathways. We are on Instagram, Vincentian Pathways. So you can access us. We don't actually have a mailing address because we aren't on the street. We have no frontage. So we're dealing with that. So our best communication is through the website. And our email is vincentianpathways@gmail.com.
It's all on these sheets of paper, and there's cards about an auction that you have until Sunday night at 10 to jump in and grab a real deal, so. And that's on our website.
So maybe Margie, if you wanted to stand over in that area to answer questions specifically.
You're not dismissed yet. Two more things. I thought it was interesting, those ponds or the lakes. Ned Hubble, who lived in the 1800s into 1970-something when he died, Ned Hubble said that they would cut ice from that and then pack it in sawdust, and it was stored in 2 ice houses down the hill at Tinker's Creek. And the other thing I want you to know is Sister Dorothy is a lifelong resident of Bedford. She grew up on Layton Avenue, which is near me, and was a teacher at Lumen Cordium and then a professor over at Ursuline on religious studies. So, thank
A
you.
native, well, not quite a native. I was born in Cleveland, but came here when I was 8. So it's close enough.
Bedford's spent more than me, I can't believe it. All right,
Thank you so
we're turning
much.
back to Betsy and food.